Welcome to the Mobility Talks. This is episode 17 and the last episode of our season 3. Today's topic is how will living labs bring life to innovation in mobility ecosystems? We are all well aware that the governance of urban mobility is made up of complex interactions between users on a journey who are signaling choices and preferences, but who are not usually in a position to actually drive change in a system. And on the other hand, we have transport operators or service providers who are in the business of urban mobility and whose innovations through technology or the creative use of public space create new ways of imagining mobility in the 21st century. But behind all of that, there are public policies, regulations, and infrastructure which create a set of boundaries for all the players involved. So what role can living labs play in this ecosystem? Well, today we'll be hearing about living labs from our keynote speaker, and that will be followed by a panel debate where we will be deep diving into some operational and practical considerations for living labs in urban mobility. Now, before we go there, what is a living lab? Which is in fact the first question of our Slido poll, which you can reach by clicking on the Slido tab to the right of the live stream. Is a living lab an experiment in real life? Is it a meeting room for scientists? Is it a smart city? Is it software that analyzes user data? Or is it a citizen-led research project? Now, I know this sounds a bit like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but to be honest, I'm not even sure there is the right answer in there. So yes, you can call a friend, but the point here is just to give us an idea. You can also let us know in the chat what you think a living lab is. But of course, the whole point of this episode is precisely to explore the notion of living labs and see how they might best fit into an innovative urban mobility strategy. So as usual with our mobility talks, even if we're online, we like to try and create a highly interactive experience. So for all your questions and comments, please use the chat and I'll be keeping an eye and raising points to our speakers as we go through the program. Now, we had over 140 registrations for today's episode, so you are in good company with attendees joining us from 35 different countries, 18 from the EU, 17 not from the EU. So there's also a good mix between academia, industry and SMEs, as well as European and local institutions or authorities. So a warm welcome to all of you. And now, if you're ready, how will living labs bring life to innovation in mobility ecosystems? We kick off this session with an opening presentation by Wim de Kinderen. He is the Vice Chair of the European Network of Living Labs. He'll be giving us some ideas about the concept of the living lab and insights on the many activities happening within the living lab community. Wim, welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you, John Paul, and thank you everybody for joining this session. I'm very honored to have been invited to speak in this session. So I'm Wim de Kinderen. I'm going to shift my camera so that you can better see me. In daily life, I'm working for the Regional Development Agency of the Eindhoven region and City of Eindhoven, but today I'm speaking as the Vice Chair of ENEL, the European Network of Living Labs, and happy to do so. This is about bringing life to mobility aspects, so I hope I can bring a bit of life at the start of this session. So what is ENEL? ENEL is the European Network of Living Labs. It's an international network which is all about promoting and stimulating the debate and the knowledge about living labs. And we started our activities in 2007. You see here a little bit a moving picture on where our members have been originating over the years. Over the years, we have been labeling around 500 living labs. And what we do as an association, of course, is about strengthening our members, exchanging knowledge, but also we're quite active in interacting with the European institutions in terms of better policy framework support, and we are supporting our members in project implementations. When I'm talking members, we are a global network in spite of our name, European Network of Living Labs. Of course, largely we are European. The figures are here. These are figures from 1 year ago, I think. But actually our global appearance, so our non-European participation is growing again at this moment. I've already been speaking about ANOL as a network of living labs, but I haven't even touched the concept of living labs. So living what? What is a living lab? There are many definitions of a living lab sometimes, and I think my colleagues who are going to be in the panel debate after me will all have a slightly different explanation on how they apply the living lab in their city, in their organization. And that's perfectly okay, because there are many, many forms of living labs, but they have a few things in common, and that's what it's all about. They all bring together the players of the quadruple helix, the so-called quadruple helix, which is public authorities, industry, academia, and the end users, which in many cases, but not always, is an individual citizen. And they, on the right figure, you see a number of characteristics of every living lab, where the real life setting, I would say, and the co-creation with the end users is really the key characteristic which you will find in every living lab. So the real life environment where the living lab as an organization, as a setting of a ecosystem orchestrator, as we sometimes call it, is what we do. Just as there are many different variations of living labs, also the core organization which is hosting a living lab can differ. And here from our membership, you see what the balance or non-balance between hosting organizations of living labs is. You see a variety here, a large representation of the academic sector and research and innovation in general, but also, for example, as I said, I'm working for the city public entities. So cities and regions are also often the hosts of living labs. Here you see some typologies of different living labs, and most living labs in practice combine elements of the ones you see here, urban and rural living labs. That is, sometimes you see cities labeling themselves as a living lab, so the entire region or city is provided as a space for real-life experimentation and co-creation. You also have living lab as a service, where there are really organizations helping out companies in particular to offer them with living lab methodology supports in further developing, testing, and validating their services. We've got the research-driven living labs, which are really at the core focused on research, as the name is saying it itself, and then living test beds, which is maybe more about product testing, which is really initiated by the developer of a new technology, for example. There are few pure forms of these, as said, most of them combine elements of the types shown here on the screen. When we're talking about the benefits of a living lab, because at the end, that is what it's about. It's a beautiful concept where there's a collaboration between the main actors with the involvement of the end user, which we can only support. But why would anyone engage into a living lab apart from the nice concept? Well, there's a benefit. And especially in this mobility talk organized by the EIT Urban Mobility, which is all about entrepreneurship. Of course, also having many cities on board through the City Lab, but we are trying to stimulate entrepreneurship. And why would a company engage into a living lab? Which is an effort. It's an effort, but it's an effort which rewards. IMEC, a famous RTO from Belgium, has done a study, and really a study not only on the basis of interviews of people who were actually doing the living labs themselves, so they had an interest to basically say that the activity was successful. No, they really went into the figures of the companies. Did this really bring you profit? And the end result is basically that, first of all, living labs are a way of de-risking innovation. It speeds up the innovation process with better results. The innovation process is changed according to the insights that you gather. So the end result is different than you had imagined, but you know it thanks to the insights that you get from all the participants in a living lab. But sometimes also the innovation was just stopped because early in the process, it became clear that the innovation would not work out. So that is maybe an unintended effect of the process, but it's a good effect because it saves you a lot of time and money as a company to engage into your new innovation. So it was not even beneficial to alter, to modify the innovation, but just clearly to stop it. As NL, we have a number of services. So first of all, as a living lab, so in between your peers, you go through a certification process, which assesses you on a number of criteria. I will show it in the next slides. We help you in building your capacity, and we can do that in many forms. We have beginner days, let's say. We have collective courses where you can learn together with more experienced colleagues from all over the world. But we also give mentoring one-on-one. We can design a course customized for your organization's needs. And then, of course, just like any association, I would say, we also have our working groups. We call them action-oriented task forces. It's a bit of a complicated name, but they're mainly thematic working groups where you can meet with your colleagues. And also in this respect, at the past, we've already quite been exchanging with EIT Urban Mobility, for example. So we do that within our membership, but we also clearly reach out to colleagues outside. So there's a labeling and certification process where you can apply at any time. Before we only had one wave per year, but today you can apply at any time. And you are being assessed on a number of criteria, which are grouped in 6 categories. I'm not sure if you can see it on the slides. I think, Jean-Paul, the slides will be shared afterwards, but you're being assessed on the topic of your organization. I'm not going into all the details, but you can definitely reach out to me on the aspect of users and reality, on your resources, so really the infrastructure and the material you have to operate your living lab, the openness, because that is, of course, key in every living lab, the value that you deliver to your stakeholders, and your business model, which in particular is targeting your future sustainability. Because all too often, and that's really a pity to see, many living labs are project funded. So it means that very often beautiful processes and projects are being set up, but when the project, so temporarily funding, stops, the living lab often stops as well. And that is something that we as NL definitely want to prevent from happening. So giving you support in your financial sustainability is also part of our service. The capacity building program, I think I already explained a bit. And then we have our areas of work, our working groups, where you see a number of typologies. I put the one on mobility a bit larger. And I think if you put the one on mobility and the one on smart cities together, smart cities often is also related to mobility, of course, you've got quite a big chunk of our members who are active in one of these 2 areas. I'm finalizing with a few examples, but my colleagues are going to some more detailed examples, but happy to share this one from my own city, Eindhoven. This is only a crossroads, which we designed and equipped with a lot of technology to simulate different scenarios in mobility. So this is what when I'm referring to one of the 4 typologies shown before, this is maybe more a living testbed, which is very much technology focused and less really user co-creation from the start. The users and the mobility users are involved, but it's mainly the companies who are at the origin who are maybe the main driving force. This is also where it started in Thessaloniki in Greece, but today Thessaloniki is really a very large-scale mobility living lab where the whole city is organized in a way to be able to host different mobility-related living labs. In Austria, we have colleagues who have been involved in a national network of mobility living labs. You see 6 of them here, where you see also on the screen what were the issues. And that is mainly about looking at the long term. So here, much attention to this sustainability aspects. and also the continuous sharpening of the initiatives to make sure they keep on being relevant. To finalize, we are quite proud as ENOL to have a very intense collaboration with the JRC, the Joint Research Center from the European Commission, which actually organized 3 of its sites, and one of them is in Ispra in Italy, as living labs. So the site in Italy has been organized today as a living lab for future mobility solutions. So they provide the whole area as a potential living lab. They open the infrastructure on the site for users, and to attract these users, they often launch open calls for companies, organizations who are willing to use the site as the infrastructure environment for their living labs. And then the visitors of the site and the researchers working on the site are the end users operating in the living lab. And this aspect will be covered by my colleagues from EIT. Lessons learned so far on user and citizen engagements. This is on the basis of our collaboration, also on collaboration of a few members of us in sessions the EIT organized still recently. I think in Barcelona during your event, you had a whole session on this. So I think my colleagues here after me will dive into the details of this. And then I would like to thank you a lot and invite you to reach out to ENOL, the European Network of Living Labs, and see what we could potentially mean for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim. And indeed, you will also be part of the panel, so you're not running away just yet, and you'll continue to give us also some thoughts and insights on the methodology around living labs and some of the conceptual aspects also to help us through, as we'll deep dive a little bit more on the urban mobility aspect. So thanks a lot, Wim. And so I would like now to introduce our panelists today. So we are joined also then by Julienne Chen. She is Citizen Engagement and Program Manager at EIT Urban Mobility. Hello, Julienne. We are joined by Jana Rina, Project Manager at Forum Virium in Helsinki. Hello, Jana. We have Liat Shaham, Head of Business Development and Partnerships at City Zone. So welcome to you as well. And Wim, as I said, who will be part of the panel. So before we deep dive into urban mobility, let's just have a quick look at the Slido results. So what is a living lab for you? In the audience, we're talking about real life experiments and citizen-led research projects. That seems to be what is coming out here. But as Wim outlined, it's also about this process of co-creation. That didn't necessarily appear in some of the answers that were here. So I'm sure there's a lot more to living labs and a lot more to living labs in urban mobility. So let's hear it from our panelists. What is a living lab for you? Liat, can I start with you?
Yes, please.
Tell us what it is.
So, I mean, for us, if I go into the survey, so we, I think, comply with the most popular answer that was given. But instead of just saying what is a living lab, I'd like to ask what is the purpose of a living lab, okay? And for us, our living lab is part of a more holistic view whose purpose is to conduct agile innovation for the municipality of Tel Aviv-Yafo. So we are Tel Aviv's Urban Tech Sandbox and Open Innovation Lab, and we are the Open Innovation, we see ourselves as the Open Innovation Hub for Smart City, for solutions specifically for Smart City and for the municipality of Tel Aviv-Yafo. We are founded by the municipality of Tel Aviv-Yafo and the University of Tel Aviv, and the park and area, a business area called Atidim, which is inside of Tel Aviv-Yafo. And it has quite unique characteristics. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So as I said, our living lab is part of a more holistic view with a purpose to enable open innovation and adoption of technology and innovation in the city. The city of Tel Aviv, its unique features are that it has its own development unit, a very big development unit of over 300 software developers. So basically our goal is to find things that the city does not want to develop itself, that they cannot find off the shelf, and therefore they want to engage with the development or the final stages of development of a technology that would be a solution for their smart city needs, okay, for their city needs, which is, and the solution would be smart, obviously. So basically, we act as an agent to match between city needs and the startups or technologies that we found outside that are still in the final stages of development and therefore need to be tested and adapted in the final stages to the needs of a city before they can go out into the market. And what we offer the startups that the city is interested in is this physical space to sit in, is the connection to the academia with the municipality of Tel Aviv, is collaboration with the corporates and cities that we're engaged with. But the main thing that we give the startups is the city of Tel Aviv-Yafo as a design partner. And a unique asset that we have for all of this endeavor is, if you can go to the next slide, is our urban sandbox or living lab. It depends. Sometimes we want to be a bit modest and just call it a sandbox, just a place to play around with the technology, which is, on the one side, a safer environment than a regular, city street. But on the other hand, has real scenarios and real use case of a city. And our unique features, we are physically located in this business area that I mentioned. So the unique features of this business area is both that it's, again, co-owned by the city. So the city has access to it. It's not that it has to hire services of testing or of demos. It's a really live functioning area. So there are a lot of use cases that you can see here. There's an energy center, there's a hospital, there is a bus terminal, there are streets, there's parking, there are EV charging stations. There are a lot of different kind of real use cases are being used. But it's considered a logistical area. Hence, it's much easier to allow the testing and much rapidly to install. You don't need all the regulation already in places. You don't need all the authorization already in place. You don't need all the legal bureaucracies and authorization that you would need in a regular city street. So you get, on the one hand, a real area with real users and live scenarios, but on the other hand, all the bureaucracies and the hardship of placing it in a city, a live city street, I mean, you can avoid them and just go and really rapidly install your system. So, I mean, this is obviously our focus on physical systems. So it's a physical sandbox. It's not a data sandbox. It's a physical sandbox. And as I said, what is interesting in some of the survey that you mentioned is that we don't have citizens. We have users of the space that come in and out, but they don't live there. Okay, so they are engaged in some of the solutions somehow, but they are not active stakeholders, let's say. So this is what we do, and the idea is that the first implementation of the technology that the city is interested in would be in this sandbox, which is much faster and easier to implement. And it also will receive help of technicians and really everything to facilitate the implementation. And then once the city sees it and inspects it and see that it's okay, then it would go to the next phase of implementation in a city street, a regular city street. So therefore, it would be more gradual, and it will allow for not just going directly into the city with all the hardship of that, but having this gradual adoption of innovation does help the city adopt innovation easier at the end of the day. So it's a gradual process, and this is how we see it. I mean, our sandbox is a tool for us in order to fulfill our greater purpose, which is adoption of technology in the city. So this is us. And if you want, I can give you a couple of examples. We have a sensor to count people. So this is in the Open Innovation Program. We have 26 participants so far. We've been initiated almost 4 years ago now. And we have different kind of technologies being adopted, and some of them, obviously, which are the ones that are not software, are being implemented in the sandbox. And for example, RoadSense does a radar, which is obviously privacy compliant and can give counting of different people and the vehicles and animals and everything in the city space. So it gives kind of analytics about what's going on in the city. There's a company called Tupaya, which does the precise positioning in urban dense environments where the GPS is not very accurate. So they make the localization much more accurate, and they have antennas around the park. There is a company called Lumiwoop, which is a really interesting example because they started off as a C40 winner of a startup competition, and then they were implemented in Atidim as a sandbox, and they do off-grid lighting and shading with solar energy. And the first installation was in Atidim, and then they joined the Open Innovation Program after they're already installed in the park. And we have Bright Green, for example, which does sensors of air quality, indoor and outdoor, and they're implemented both indoor and outdoor in the park. So these are a few examples, and I think Jan will have a couple more when he talks. So that's us. That's Citizen.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leah. So essentially for you, a living lab is actually a place, a space where a city is, in this case, Tel Aviv, is investing to support its innovation, to test out new technology in a kind of safe environment that's not the urban jungle as such.
Exactly.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Over to Jana then. What is a living lab for you?
Okay, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jana Rinne. I come from Forum Virium Helsinki, which is the innovation company of the city of Helsinki, fully owned by the city, non-profit, and we are doing a lot of living lab piloting and experimental activities together with the city departments and also with private companies, having a collaboration with the residents of Helsinki as well. We have a Mobility Lab Helsinki, which is the actual testbed for smart mobility in Helsinki, and this is coordinated and managed together with the city of Helsinki and Forum Virium. So what do we do in practice? The Helsinki, it comes already from the previous city strategy that the city is used as a testbed for developing new kinds of solutions. This means that we have a lot of infrastructure, buildings, street environment, even procurement processes and investments that can be utilized as a testbed for developing new things. And you can explore these different domains in testbed.hel.fi if you want to. And the funding for the activities come from the economic development point of view. So basically, we try to support companies' research in developing new things and innovation, then leading to new products, growth, etc. But also, we want to produce better services for the city itself, better solutions, and eventually also for the citizens. It's quite important to highlight also that learning is one of the key aspects of the living lab. So basically learning about the new emerging technologies, services, solutions that come from the market. So the city and the city planners, civil servants, even politicians stay up to date what is happening in the world, because the mobility in the cities is changing so rapidly nowadays. I think the last slide is just to give you the overview of the bunch of the type of things that we've done. So basically we've been running these kind of living lab, mobility lab activities under the mobility lab title for about 5 years already. Of course, earlier we had a bunch of smart mobility projects and pilots, but as a mobility lab, we have been doing a lot of things. I think in the early phases, we were doing a lot of things with the mobility services, whether it was car sharing, cargo bikes, or water traffic. And now slowly the emphasis has turned into better utilization of data and developing digital twins and what kind of possibilities these types of new solutions can bring, both to the private companies who are developing new solutions, but also for the city to make it a better place for the citizens to understand better what's happening in the traffic, how it should be improved, what kind of interventions could be done in the infrastructure or the mobility management. Just to name a few, I'll be brief. I think we have done things from ride sharing of the football juniors to electric boats, autonomous street sweepers, even drone deliveries and micro hubs for light logistics. And then we have a lot of data-oriented pilots evaluating the feasibility of different data collection methods, but also transferring this knowledge for the planners and also for the residents in the city. I think that's in brief, and I'll be happy to continue in the panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Janne. So in your case, a living lab is actually a public authority making available its own infrastructure for testing innovation. So in a way, it's like the public procurement is one of the biggest markets in the world. Well, public infrastructure can be one of the biggest test beds in the world as well, to some extent. So that'll be interesting to follow up on that one.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Great. Over to Julienne then. What is a living lab for you as citizen engagement as well manager? We've heard about citizens already.
We have. So hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. My name is Julienne Chen. I'm the Citizen Engagement Manager at EIT Urban Mobility. And I'm really glad that we're starting with these definitions, because we can see from all of the other presentations that a living lab can really mean a lot of different things. Maybe a little bit like smart cities, or dare I even say citizen engagement, which makes a lot of sense because these are really big concepts. And in the end, I take a rather literal interpretation, probably aligned with what Wim was talking about with living test beds, and those who were in the Slido poll talked about real life experiments. So for me, a living lab, in a lab you run experiments. And then the word living for me implies that it's a real breathing and really importantly, an evolving environment. And that can take place at a lot of different scales, depending on the maturity of what you're testing, whether it's a secure building or an entire city. And in the urban mobility context, we're talking about things that have huge impacts on the public space, which by definition belongs to everyone. So for me, it's not just about testing a technology, but also understanding the broader impacts on society and all of the different frameworks that we've created over the years to ensure that we have a quasi-democratic outcome and that we balance the needs of different stakeholders. So Jean-Paul, going back to your question about what a living lab is for me, in the end, it's an environment that deliberately facilitates that discussion. And there's this video that went viral from the city of San Francisco, and the city of San Francisco, for various reasons, has become a huge testing bed for autonomous vehicles, which, by the way, now also includes unstaffed ride-sharing vehicles that are actively in use. And in this video, which I don't know if you've seen it or not. If not, I put a still of the video here in the slide. A police officer tries to pull over an autonomous vehicle with no one inside of it. And the police officer goes to the car and they look inside, and then they go to the other side and they look inside again. And then the car drives off. And in the background of the video, you can hear a woman saying something like, "Are you serious? How can this happen?" And we have these conversations over and over, whether it's with autonomous vehicles or e-scooters or electric car charging infrastructure or speed pedelecs. And what's important to me is that we use this living lab environment as a place to truly learn, like Jana said, and resolve these complex conversations and situations. Because at the end of the day, I do truly believe in the transformative power of many of these new technologies, but they need to be rolled out in as thoughtful a way as possible, which in the end can make everyone successful. And so for me, that's what the living lab environment and ethos can support.
Okay, so it's an environment to enable experimentation. It needs to have certain rules to make sure that we're not going into some more risky areas. So if we have in our audience people who are thinking, you know, this is interesting, this living lab concept, and yes, it makes sense for urban mobility because we need to experiment, we need to try out new things. Is there coming out from your different projects some kind of a methodology, some kind of key pillars of a methodology to get users involved, to get users to co-create with others, and to operate living labs? Can you give us some highlights on that? Maybe Jana first.
Yeah, but well, I think whether I want to talk about principles or methods, but I think operating in an open way is quite a good starting point as a principle. So basically everybody who is involved know what they are involved in and what kind of things are expected and what kind of things they are subjected to when they are in a living lab environment. As a tools, I think you have a bunch of things. Some things relate with the participation of the residents, and then you have more like this technical, how do you arrange open calls and this kind of collaboration between different parties. Maybe I could highlight here the concept of agile piloting that we've been developing in Helsinki, which is a fast way to try out new things with SMEs and startups. Maybe in some cases even with corps, but it's more for startups and SMEs who can take part through this in solving the city's problems and challenges. So agile pilots are like a fixed method that we have applied a lot, where you define the challenge together with the city, and then you have an open call and invite all the relevant stakeholders and obviously the residents in the co-creation. So maybe that's one of the methodological highlights that I could briefly tell from Helsinki. But please, colleagues, share your thoughts also from elsewhere.
Yeah, maybe Wim as well to comment, because in Liet's model we have something happening in a very specific environment, so outside of the city, let's say, to put it that way, and not with citizens. Is that quite common that we would put something outside of a kind of real life environment in a way, or do you see rather the opposite happening within the network? And what kind of methodology would you say is the best?
I think a hardcore living labber will say that the first example is not a living lab, because the word safe environment is almost in contradiction with a living lab. But I do agree that there are, of course, different grades that you can apply. You can have a free space within a building, and then it's still a semi-safe environment because you do not harm the outside world, I would say. And you also don't harm the users, because indeed, you have to take into account everybody's interests with all the vulnerability aspects, I think. So there's nothing wrong with those semi-safe environments, as long as you try to keep as close as possible to the real life experiment, I think. So that's one. On methodological highlights or tools, I think from the network, I would like to mention the panel management, which is being operated by IMEC again. I have already mentioned them on this study of the added value of living labs. What is important in the attraction of end users is, of course, that it's also representative, and that you just do not only target the usual suspects or the ones who are really eager to participate in these kinds of experiments, because that is not how you will get the best results. And this scouting for users, managing them, attracting them is a really intensive process. And I think that IMEC in Belgium is quite unique in the scale of its panel. They have a panel which is a database basically with thousands of people with their own profiles who they can use, who they can mobilize towards the different living lab projects, however small or large they are. And that is a enormous cost-intensive operation, but when you look at the overall number of living lab projects that they do, it's actually a saving operation, because if you each time have to start from scratch to get this panel mobilized and engaged into living lab activities, then you're even off with more time and more costs.
I mean, there is also this question of, do you know you are entering a space that is currently being experimented on? And so in the safe environment, you would know that very likely. In the open environment, you may not. So maybe also a comment then from Liat on how you view that, and especially then maybe the shift from the safe environment to the less safe environment. And a quick unmute, Liat.
Sorry. So let me just, I don't know if correct you or put things more right. We're not an outside of the city area. We are inside the city. There is the city center, and then the city of Tel Aviv has different neighborhoods and different areas with different type of characteristics. There are some more, business-oriented areas, and are more suburban areas, and there are different kind of areas. So we are a real living. We have real living scenarios of our type of, let's say, neighborhood. Okay. So, but that's, and yes, and obviously, as you said, I don't think there exists a perfect living lab. I don't know. Maybe there is, and Wim knows better than me. But the more you get to more open, more exposed, more people, then it's easier to make very agile experiment, because there's much more stakeholders involved, much more bureaucracy, and then you do less. So it's kind of a trade-off, I think, and the policy or the methodology or the strategy of the city of Tel Aviv is to say, okay, we'll not just go first for the holy grail, because basically the more open you go, it's basically, even you can you can debate whether it's a living lab or it's actually already a use case of or the city, and it's a real scenario anyway. So the city said, okay, I'll look at my needs, what the city as a client. Okay, so the city, I'll see what I need, I'll see what's out there, I'll see what could be relevant for me as a city to adopt. And we as in Citizen, we try to see that it's really a serious need. It's not just, oh, I'd like to see it, but that if someone works at it and there's a startup working behind the scene, that afterwards it can be adopted in the city. There will be budgets for it. So we do a whole process of, a big process before we get to this match, okay, between the potential technology in the city. We do a big work in locating the stakeholder, understanding if it's a real need or not, and then doing the match. And then the graduality of it is that we do a demo in our neighborhood, and then it goes into one or two implementation in the city, on the way to a broader implementation in the city. So it's an adoption which is gradual. And then this is our methodology. Basically, we do it with calls, as in Helsinki, and either in calls or that we seek out, and then we find the technology that is interesting, and then we actively also try to see if the city is interested in a specific technology. We do it both ways, either a city need or an interesting technology that could be implemented, and then we go gradually. So this is our methodology.
So you have a process to scale up with, which is also interesting. And we've heard previously on this mobility talk, so maybe that's one for Julienne. We've heard previously about tactical urbanism. Okay, I'm not an urban mobility specialist, but I've heard about tactical urbanism, where a measure is introduced, and then a city will see how citizens react, to that measure as a kind of a real life experiment. How are living labs different to that? I mean, in urban mobility, are living labs more about, creating some kind of public acceptance, or are they more about getting citizens to really design their public space? What would you say would be their role?
Well, that's a tricky one to try to tie it into tactical urbanism, but maybe to start with, I can mention a report that EIT Urban Mobility commissioned in 2021 on living labs. And in that report, they talk about three different types of citizen and user engagement. So first, there's the ideation, so identify new ideas and needs. Then, of course, there's co-creation and co-design, so developing the products collaboratively. And then the third is around validation and user testing. And in the survey of the 47 living labs, they found that about 25% of them do all three of these types of engagement. And so I think when we look at citizen engagement, I'm not sure that the tactical urbanism analogy necessarily makes sense, because we're talking about lots of other things that are not necessarily in the public space, but that people need to interact with every day. And so we can be talking about tools or cars or apps or whatever that is. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that we're working with people to develop these ideas, make sure that they're matching local needs, and that we're engaging them properly on what they think about it. And in a way, what I think is really essential, building upon what the other people have said, is that we need to really continue to build the competences to do this type of engagement in really meaningful and human ways. And it does require a very special skill set. So exactly, how do you get a diverse group of people to show up to your ideation workshop, and how do you unleash their creativity? How do you get people to open up and talk in an interview? How do you design a good usability test? How do you translate and communicate the findings in a way that both software developers and policymakers can do something with it? So no matter what are the environments that we're engaging citizens on, I think what's really important is that we start thinking more and more about the competences to do that work very well, because we tend to call these things soft skills when actually it's really, really hard to do. And so that's why I'm glad to see that actually in this panel there's so much conversation about public engagement, citizen engagement, because it signals that we're ready to take that next step.
And at the same time, it's very difficult to design these projects, because when you're thinking about a project, you kind of want some sort of outcome. And there is a usual bias in this type of project, that you're trying to get to the result that you expect or that you want, and you're a bit averse to the project going into a totally different direction, which will have policy potential impacts as well. Jana, how do you deal with that in terms of the methodology of making sure that these projects are indeed driven by the users? And how would you connect that to tactical urbanism? Do you see a link between the two, or are they completely different concepts?
Okay, tricky ones. Of course, these are terms, but I mean, the way I understand tactical urbanism is that it's a bit more citizen society driven concept, whereas in our living lab we still have this kind of innovation, economic development point of view quite strong. I'm not saying they are excluding, but I think as a concept they are quite different. What comes to the to involving citizens, we did in the early phase of the living lab quite a lot of workshops in the neighborhood that we operated in, did participatory events, tried to figure out their wishes, their pain points, even their concerns about the local mobility, what kind of things should be addressed, and these needs then were translated into piloting programs and EU projects and that kind of thing. So I think in the very early stage we did this kind of let's say pre-mapping of the key priorities and concerns in the area, and we kept being present in the community with the local NGOs and local planners and all that. Of course, the Corona time was quite a tricky period for the citizen engagement. We tried to do it electronically, but that was really painful, trying to really get people interactive at that time. But I think there were no magic tricks. We just went to the community and went asking what are the priorities and concerns, what type of problems should be solved with the new solutions.
A comment from Rim as well on this, allowing users to really design, co-design a project. I mean, I would imagine you would have come across many projects where this design bias will possibly influence users more than the other way around. Have you found ways around this problem?
Is this one for me or for the...
For Wim.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
But I will come back to you, Jan, because I'm going to give your Helsinki as a good example, actually. I'm not sure if this is a direct answer to your question, but in the previous question to Julian, you seem to oppose the citizens' interest with the company's interest, for example. I think the beautiful thing about Living Labs is exactly about finding the right balance about everybody's interests, because the opposition between, for example, the end user which can be an individual citizen or a future consumer or a client. And the company is a false contradiction, because it's not in the interests of the company to just nudge a client or a customer into their solution, because if it's really not corresponding to their needs, they will not buy it a second time, or they will not take that specific public transport solution, for example. So it's in everybody's interest to be very clear from the start and to find that balance all over the project. We had what you were saying, Liat, about gradually upscaling is really important as well. Of course, most living labs, also for budget reasons, start small, but where it often fails is to upscale it. That's the real challenge. So I think that is something where we have many bad examples, unfortunately, and a few good ones. And policy here is important as well. That's also why I like the term sandbox, because sandbox is often used in the context of free regulation space, let's say. I showed you the overview of the working groups we have with Enel. There's also a new one, which was not on the slides, and that is one we do in collaboration with the Joint Research Center on living labs as a tool for regulatory learning. So it's really about testing new regulations in a living lab context. And if you dare have a real result, this translates into new policies, which is very abstract, but of course it has a huge impact, because then you can really apply it to the level of your whole city, of even your whole region or your country. And then the last thing, which is in particular interesting, I think, for the group of people here in the panels, which is cities, is the original question, like, the living lab is not a goal in itself, it's a means. So what is it that you want your living lab to do? And there I always give the example of Helsinki, and please correct me, Jan, if I'm making a bit of a shortcut, but the development of your new districts, and my Finnish is not so good, but I think it's Kalasatama. So there, the question was not, do we want this certain technology to work, and will we set up a living lab to make that happen? No, the question that the city put forward was that we want future residents to have extra spare time, extra free time. If I'm not wrong, it was 1 hour per day. 1 hour of free time per day is really a lot. And then you start thinking about solutions which can be high-tech, which can be low-tech, which can be non-tech as well, because it also involves organizing childcare, for example. And that is really, I think, a beautiful way of how a living lab can contribute to the livability in your city, and also helping your companies and your academic partners in the same time, for example.
So you're really talking about partnership, and things are not in opposition, but, and you also mentioned in your introduction slides the quadruple helix, and so the living labs are really building around that. So when it comes to urban mobility, we face another challenge, which is infrastructure, which is difficult to move. It's there. So how do you deal with that in urban mobility? And I'll refer to the three panelists on this side. How do you deal in terms of partnerships related to urban mobility? What works? What are the key ingredients that you need to think about to make projects successful and drive change on the local level? Maybe we can go to Julienne first.
Sure, it's a great question, and maybe I can respond while also building upon what Wim was just talking about, because I completely agree that the goal of a living lab is very much to think about how we mediate different interests to create a great solution that everyone can support, right? That would be in an ideal world. And I'm actually thinking about a project from a couple of years ago that was in the United States, where they were actually testing a new technology, which is called a gunshot detector, which I say with no comment about why that's needed. And what they essentially do is they put these microphones across the city, and then when they hear a gunshot, they deploy the police to that neighborhood. And of course, it's also generating lots of data about safety and crime, et cetera. And you can probably imagine that there's a lot of potential points of controversy here. And one of the primary ones is that there's actually a very, very difficult relationship between police and the people living in the communities where these gunshot detectors would normally be deployed. So in my opinion, it's very difficult to deploy these technologies on a broad scale if there isn't trust between the city and the inhabitants of the city. So do people believe that their cities are going to do what's right for them? Do their leaders have a track record of delivering great projects and protecting their interests? And of course, this is not a problem that a living lab can solve. And I think this certainly falls outside of the normal remit of what we think about when we talk about citizen engagement in the context of a living lab. But on the other hand, people operating within a living lab environment should at least be aware of this broader context and how it impacts on their work. And that's why, when you talk about that model of the quadruple helix with the companies and the cities and researchers and citizens working together, I think that is really, really essential, not only to have on paper, but in reality as well. And one of the key things underlying is that is this level of trust and how we operate as a society.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because that pushes a bit the level of responsibility in a way more on the public authority side, and the living lab would be some kind of tool also to develop public policy and create a stronger bond with citizens. I guess you could also imagine that living labs could challenge public policy, and maybe that's not something some public authorities would enjoy so much. Jano, how do you see living labs in this context with urban mobility? Do you see them as a tool for public authorities, or rather a tool for citizens to challenge public authorities?
I would like to think it's a tool for let's say finding a common interest, like was mentioned earlier. I think in our case, many of the, let's say, the key topics or challenges come from the city. Well, we have the resident collaboration, but I think many of the key things are, like I said, managed by the city, whether it's land use planning, traffic planning, or mobility management, or investments. So therefore, I'd like to highlight the importance of involving the city in the activities, especially in the mobility context, because we do have the infra, we do have the land use planning, we do have all these big things that are managed by the city. So if the city and the city departments are committed and involved, I think it brings various impacts, good ones, because then the practical implementation in the street space, it becomes a lot easier if the city and the city civil servants are involved. Also, I think if the pilot or experiment produces some kind of learnings or conclusions, these are quite likely to be absorbed and used by the city if the city is involved. And I think the last part is the scaling up thing, which was referred. So basically, if you manage to produce something useful, it's a lot more likely that it will scale up and that it will influence bigger processes such as planning processes, investments, this type of things. So even though we are talking about the living lab setting with the residents involved, I couldn't highlight more the importance of making the city committed in the things, especially if you operate from an innovation unit or innovation company like us.
And Leah, in your case, I mean, this seems to be a strong drive from the public authority itself to have this space available, test things in this area that you described. But what came first? I mean, is it a decision by the public authority to say we want to develop this, or did it come more from other bodies and then it happened in this area? Quick unmute, Liet.
Sorry, relating to the debate that was just, it presumes that, let's say for the example, which is an extreme example, given about this gunshot detector, okay? So it presumes there is already a ready-made technology for, for detecting this, and then we need to engage or involve the citizen to ask them what they feel about it. Do they want to implement it or not? What we do is a stage before that, which I think is maybe a little bit overlooked in this dialogue, or it's kind of it looks at it as if it's one unit, and in our view, it's not. First of all the companies developing technologies, and most of the technologies are not as controversial, at least the ones that we've seen in our short life. They need a real, city playground, sandbox, and maybe less regulated, maybe less, that they can even prove that this technology of theirs exists works, sorry, and then they can also fine tune it to the real city conditions and not just in a laboratory, which they, that was their first stage, and now they need to see that it's, maybe for example, if it's a sensor, that other noises, don't make it less effective, or so they first need that. They first need this playground just to know that what they're doing has even a real possibility and can really even be a kind of solution. And then would be, the stage of citizen engagement in our view. Okay. And what we provide is even, the stage before, to say, okay, let's see that, you can actually do it, and we'll help you. We'll facilitate this for you to do that before we reach the stage. This is already a technology that we know can do what you think it can do. Okay. And then okay, let's go to the city. And not all of the technologies also require a city is a municipality. A city is a big organization. Some technologies are, let's say, more, as you said, infrastructural, and then on top of it would be the citizen engagement. So a lot of the technologies you just need for the daily operation of the basic operation of the city, and it's not something that controversial or that requires, it's like the basic operations, and this is something that we enable. And I think, for example, there was one experiment that we did with a focus group, which was we tested, and I think with the EIT Urban Mobility in a program called Raptor, City Raptor. So we did special locks for bicycles, to smart locks. And there we did a focus group with citizen engagement, and we did that. This was one thing. And let's say, if you try to test the precise location and to see if actually there is a technology that can make the GPS more accurate, I don't think this is something the citizen would be concerned with necessarily, or needs to. It's something more technical, but you have to test it in an urban environment, in a dense environment, and you have to allow them to implement their technology, their antenna, or and their sensor to see that they can actually do that they can reach precise position. So we enable it for them. And then obviously the use cases on top of that, of what kind of application would you use precise location for, that's something that you can do with citizens. But there is a step before that, and this is what we do, this is what we give. Okay, so this is, I see, our little bit of help into this smart city living lab question.
And that is the sense of scale that we have, because I would imagine in certain living lab projects where you have a product or a service directly linked to a user, that's a relatively isolated environment. But in urban mobility, you have a much larger environment to cope with infrastructure issues, with public authorities very much present. So that's where it gets a little bit more tricky, it seems, to scale up, because you need to involve a lot more actors. So when we're talking about living labs, in your experience, do you see that in urban mobility they remain more as experimentation tools, or do you feel that they are actually methods that you can employ to convince and try and get cities to make much bigger policy decisions that will actually affect urban mobility on a large scale? Jana first.
Both. Maybe the answer you didn't want to hear, but I think both. Well, in practice, it's an experimentation tool, obviously. But I would like to see living labs or our mobility lab as an instrument which somehow produces learnings and insights for bigger questions that are solved in the city. Whether it's about how to deal with e-scooters in the city, or whether what kind of traffic light optimization would be desirable in order to alleviate congestion, or should we have shared cargo bikes in the neighborhood? Would people use them if the city provided them as part of the city bike program? So I would say that I would like to see Mobility Lab as a tool to provide insights, data, and results for as an input for bigger processes that really change things in larger scale. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, Julien.
So I do think that we're talking, just to be clear, I agree that there's two things that are both very important. So one is the focus on usability and having great things in cities that are well designed and work very well. And I think that is absolutely critical and an essential part of what the Living Labs can do. And then of course there's broader discussions about what do we want our society to be like and how do we all of these different tools and technologies fit into society. And both are important and both drive policy. So if you look at, let's say, a bike share system across two cities, I have two cities in mind, but I'm not going to name them. And one is very well used and one is very not well used. You can probably assume that there's a couple of factors that go into that. And in my opinion, a lot of those are related to usability and design. So if you do surveys of people, they say, if you're not a regular user, then coverage is really important. If you're a regular user, then maintenance is really important. These are insights that are important, and I do think that they drive public policy. And then on the other hand, I'm not really sure why I'm thinking about this, but we also have, these bigger questions. And the thing that I get a little bit worried about, maybe going a little off topic here, is that we get caught in the cult of personality in a way. So if Elon Musk shows up and says, I hate traffic and my solution is to build tunnels under the city, that's really great. But we also have to be able to evaluate this objectively and its implications in the real world and on people who have really the least say in what happens to them. And so for me, I don't work in a living lab, so I'm certainly myself curious about, how do we take these really big innovative ideas that you might call breakthrough thinking, but then adapt them into a city environment? And I think that's a really interesting question that I'd love to hear more about as well.
Yeah, and that I would like to send to Wim, actually, over the course of the development of this European network and the living labs that you are aware of. Do you see a trend towards cities directly taking on board this kind of activity, this kind of methodology, as part of their public decision making on a local scale? And would you see trends or elements that could be interesting for this community and urban mobility?
I think overall living lab activity is growing with all the variations we have. And what I think, because I was actually on the original question, I was going back to the crossroad picture that I showed in Eindhoven. What's interesting is that this is not only being used as a test and experiment zone for that particular crossroad to create a better traffic flow and to make it safer. Of course, if this works, then we will apply the findings throughout the city. We're doing this with private partners with who we have an agreement that we can take over the infrastructure for free, actually, if we want to. And we did, because we were happy after 1 year experiment. So we're continuing this now on our own force. And that's the point I want to make in terms of this impact and involving more cities and more actors. This crossroad is now part of a new European project, which is going to start 1st of January, an artificial intelligence test and experimentation facility for smart cities. So we are part of a big consortium, which has all kinds of infrastructures and data sets where AI developers can make use of, basically, to test and validate again their new algorithms. So that is, I think, also a beautiful way to enlarge the results, to build on previous results, which again are going to create new results and will have their effects in cities all over Europe and hopefully even beyond.
Okay, thanks a lot. And then the last one then to Liat. So we've heard a lot about how Tel Aviv is organizing this test bed. If you had cities here online listening to you, considering maybe the idea, what would be your key kind of recommendation to them in this area of setting an experimentation test bed?
Well, again, I don't know if it would be the same recommendation as Wim has or as Julien, because our test bed is quite different or unique. But I think if you can find a way to, let's say, liberalize, okay, your testing in a way that could make it more agile and more frequent and more easy to not be afraid of a technology, but to be able to implement quite freely and do it gradually, I think it can really help adopt innovation. And then, of course, the last stage obviously needs to be, if it's a technology that is obviously forward-facing, it's not infrastructural, it needs to be at the end engaging citizens and focus group, etc. But I think it could be gradual, and I think that would ease the way for more cities to start this process and not be afraid of it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liet. Thank you to Julienne. Thanks to Jana and to Wim for having shared all these insights on living labs and living lab methodology and how that might help spur innovation also in urban mobility. Thanks to the four of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you can let us know your views in the audience. How useful do you think living labs might be to spur change and innovation in urban mobility? That's the topic of our last closing poll. I see that the answers are shifting towards highly useful. So that's probably because our panelists did a great job at talking about the concept, but hopefully also giving you some ideas about how to implement this kind of methodology. So you can keep answering that Slido poll. And I will now invite Yann Simon, City Demo Officer and Innovation at EIT Urban Mobility. And Yann, you will be giving us some conclusions on today's episode.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to everyone for the very interesting presentation and animated debate. So it's very insightful to hear from experts and actors from living labs, not only in Europe, but around the world, as we had Liat from Tel Aviv. So it's also great as a summary to see the impact of living labs as a key tool for open innovation. We could see that and hear that living labs provide an opportunity for the real life testing of products and services, for user engagement, but also co-creation to accompany the mobility transition, as we could see in Atedin Park in Tel Aviv, in Helsinki, testbed, but also in Ispra, Italy, with the EU Joint Research Center. So one of the EIT Urban Mobility programs, and that connects to the slide that you can all see here, is a very good example of this open innovation, co-creation, and multi-stakeholder engagement. It's called Raptor. What Raptor means? It means Rapid Application for Transport. It's a city-driven, challenge-based, and agile innovation program of EIT Urban Mobility. And the purpose of Raptor is that it matches niche urban mobility challenges to solutions from startups and SMEs. Awarded startups get 5 months to develop a product and services to solve the city challenge. So the real impact of Raptor is quite quick. And just to have an overview of Raptor in a few numbers. So this year was the first year where we launched Raptor. We started very early in 2022 with the first demonstrations and pilot developments. We work with 19 cities across Europe, but also outside EU. So we worked firstly with Brussels, Toulouse, Cunit, and Saint-Jean-d'Espy in Catalonia, but also had the chance to work with Istanbul, Cascais, and Tel Aviv. So we worked with the Atedin Park, and I will come back to this later. We also had the chance to work with Latvia, with Estonia in Riga, Tallinn, as well as Bratislava, Cluj-Napoca in Romania, and more than 225 startups applied to the program. So that was a big impact for the first year of the program. Now, one example, and that connects to what I was mentioning earlier, of Living Labs collaboration on Raptor is with Atedin Park in Tel Aviv. So from September to December 2022, Citizen, Carnet, and the 3 following startups that you can see here worked on the pilot. So we first had a curb management challenge. So the cities present challenges. 3 of the challenges presented by Tel Aviv are the ones you can see here. We had two related to pedestrian safety and curb management. One of them was won by AD Knight, who developed an area sensor and dashboard to analyze pedestrian and micromobility user routes in order to improve safety and analyze walking patterns and develop a better road awareness. And the other one, the second one that you can see here, is for pedestrian road safety, with another startup based in Israel called Cognata, who created a dynamic digital twin of a specific area chosen by the municipality where many road accidents occurred over the last years. So the city defined safety use cases with a startup in order to dynamically analyze them in the digital twin environment to improve this road safety. And last but not least, connecting to what Lee had mentioned earlier, was with Moza, a UK-based startup who answered to the anti-theft bicycle and scooters challenge. We developed a smart and secure parking technology, which was installed in the Atidim Park Living Lab, but also across the city of Tel Aviv. So these are a few examples of collaboration throughout the Raptor program of EIT Urban Mobility with Living Labs. As you could see, it's an impactful program which works at a fast pace, focusing on niche urban mobility challenges. And the interesting part is also the wide range of challenges that can be addressed with cities and Living Labs, from highest road detection in Tallinn to maintain micromobility usage in winter, as you can see in the top left corner of this picture, but also reverse logistics solutions from farms to restaurants with cargo bikes in Toulouse, as we can see in the bottom right corner. We also worked on air quality solutions. So a wide range of pilots were being developed over the last 12 months. And last but not least, to conclude, our city selection process is open for 2023. So if you're interested or would like to know more about it, feel free to reach out to us at raptor@ehiturbanmobility.eu. You can also know a bit more about the Raptor program on raptorproject.eu. So on these words, I'd like to say thank you all for joining us for this last mobility talk of the year. I hope you're leaving this webinar full of useful insights and learnings about Living Labs, and more especially their positive impacts for our cities. Take care and have a good afternoon.